All right, welcome back to the channel, everyone. This is Warren with unashamedofjesus.org, and it is a new year. And last year was a great year, and thank you for everyone who has tuned in, who is subscribed, who's following. And today, I want to share a story of a Methodist church that was shared to me by some former members of this church. A sad story, a true story about Carrollton First United Methodist Church in Eastern Ohio. Hopefully, I pronounced that correctly. And I will remove the names of anyone as much as I can for to be anonymous. But I want to share with the story that was shared with me. And the reason I'm sharing this story is because this is all too common within the Methodist denomination. And let's walk through this and we're gonna talk about this. And so let's begin with the story here. There's a husband and a wife and a family who were born and raised in the Carrollton United Methodist Church, which probably many people were, as this was a very big church at one time. Now, the interesting thing I found is I tried to look up the history where they used to have, apparently, they must have used to have the history on the website of this church, and it's no longer available. So it was removed, and for obvious reasons. So the husband and wife of this church held many various important roles within the church. I'm not going to list all of them because I don't want to make it too obvious of who these people are, but the husband and wife were heavily involved in this church, including leadership positions. And not only that, let me bring this up. This church became was thriving at one time, including it actually opened up a second location, which you can see here from their website. They had two campuses. Longtime members were probably middle of the road. Many were professional and retired folks. Their second campus they called Bridge in 2014, and this was for de-churched or unchurched folks that just want to come to church and not be involved with the church operations. And I really appreciate that. And that's kind of basically what I'm doing right now in the church, the startup church that me and my family that I'm serving as the pastor is. It's basically the same thing as this bridge. It's basically a church for unchurched folks, people who want to worship Jesus uh, as the body of Christ, but don't want to get into all the religious and political things would have to do with Christianity, which we find this is what, unfortunately, with the story with the UMC, this is what happens a lot of times with this. So so this is basically another startup and outreach location. So they had basically two locations at Carrollton. One was basically a traditional conservative Methodist church, which was, I believe, started in the 1800s. I mean, it was around for a long time. And then you had another startup church, which was reaching unsaved people. And here's the website link I put there. And like I said, some of the information appears to have been brought down. So now in 2022, the main campus folks from the large Sunday school started asking questions of to the pastor about paragraph 2553. And so I'm assuming, and I know I should have probably looked this up, but I'm assuming that this has to do with the the Methodists changing their wording on same-sex marriage, changing their stance on gay clergy. And so people started asking questions about what's going on. Okay. And the pastor got very defensive. And the pastor even labeled these people, anyone who questioned them, as troublemakers. Now, I want to bring up I will bring up this was the pastor that this all began with. Okay, so then the pastor, I guess, went to the district superintendent. For those of you who don't know who that is, district superintendent is someone who oversees an entire region, and they can be um, it can get ugly quick once you get the DS involved, which happened at my church also. So rather than the pastor just having conversations with her flock, uh, she basically reported them to the DS. So the DS came on site to the Sunday school class. Okay. Um, so you ask questions, and then they send the DS to the Sunday school class, but nobody else. Okay. The DS came there not to address all the members of the church, but only members of the church who ask questions. Okay. Um, so you're seeing a theme here. So the DS went through the procedure to start the conversation of disaffiliation. And so the Sunday school class requested a church conference, and that request was denied by the UMC. So just because now get this was just a Sunday school class, started asking questions about the UMC's change of moral stances against the Word of God, they were disaffiliated. They were, I mean, this is, and the reason this is the reason why I'm sharing these stories is because people think that I'm just out to get the UMC and I'm just bashing them. This is what's really going on in the UMC. This is what's been going on in the UMC. This is corruption at the highest level. So, shortly after the meeting with the DS, the board, the discipline board met. One board knew nothing about the DS speaking in the Sunday school class until a few of the Sunday school members actually came to a September meeting. With the DS in attendance at the one board meeting, he and the pastor convinced the one board in an executive session to vote to stay UMC and stop any discussion among the church. Now, there's a problem with that. So, a lot of the people in the church had no idea any of this was even going on. The pastor knew all this because she initiated all this, but the majority of the church had no idea what any of this was going on. Now, so the DS went from he wanted to disaffiliate this church to now he kind of convinced some of them to stay in the UMC, which they typically do because it's all about money. But the problem with this is the vote was a secret ballot and passed 10-2. The church overall knew nothing about the vote itself, okay, until it was announced by the associate pastor on the next Sunday. The one board agenda is kept secret until the meeting is held. The lead pastor took a month vacation. This lady, she took a month vacation and could not be contacted by phone or anyone for a month. Right? So she opened up a hornet's nest, and then as the shepherd, she took off because she's the hireling, right? She's not the true shepherd. Obviously, when people found out about this vote, they were furious. In fact, several board members wanted to revisit the vote and change their vote after they found out they were lied to. And the congregation was so upset, they re-voted was not going to happen. So you see a secret meeting happen, a secret vote, and they were, obviously deceived. And this is the corruption that happens. And then obviously the pastor knows that this is total corruption and that what she's doing is totally wrong and evil, and she hides instead of dealing with it. Okay, upon arrival back to church the next month, the pastor went into damage control. She told the church that one board voted because we were not changing. The UMC is not changing and if it does change, I will let you know. Okay. So here she's making empty promises that she will she and the associate pastor even hastily made a video to assure church members that nothing was going to change in the UMC. Do you imagine that? So I'm assuming what she's referring to is their change of language with gay marriage and gay clergy, which they all knew, okay, that this was going to happen. And so she's lying to the congregation, telling them nothing's going to change, nothing's going to happen. So since the general conference, nothing was said at all to the church on the subject from the pulpit or otherwise. So by November 2022, one board member meeting the entire church was very concerned about the deception and corruption displayed by the district superintendent and the pastor. At that meeting with a full house, okay, so now everybody's kind of awake to what's going on. And I apologize. Probably, when I'm talking about the changing of language with gay marriage, I might be jumping ahead of myself because it looks like this is from 2022. That could be the discussion. So, anyway, an executive session to discuss the vote again, the time with the DS and another conference official present. They came out of executive session and abruptly ended the meeting. When the folks questioned the board president, she said, "We have moved on." The one board gave the entire church the middle digit. So when people actually did show up for the meeting to vote on whether to disaffiliate from the UMC would not. They just basically canceled the meeting and said it was not going to happen. So the district superintendent not granting the conference to one board refusing to go against the pastor and no other options, the church fell apart that night. That was November 2022. So this is basically the beginning of the end of this church, unfortunately. And so just to go into the main church, attendance went from over 100 people on a Sunday. Now that think about that. Think about the state of the church today. Getting over 100 people to come on a Sunday is pretty good, including 15 volunteers. The bridge went from to about 15. So the traditional church went from over 100 people on a Sunday down to 15. Okay. You see that after this. The bridge that was their startup or their reach church, it went from 120 to 150 people on a Sunday to barely 40. So they basically collapsed also. So basically two churches collapsed. Um, so many members transferred to another church during that time. And the pastor tried to convince people to wait until general conference. So that's why I'm bringing up this pastor. Um, she said, "We can't live in fear about what might happen and knew all along what was going to happen." So again, the deception and the corruption was there. And of course, many people felt that the bishop was part of this. And I totally agree with that because I went through this whole scenario also on a smaller scale, obviously. But the bishop the bishops are very powerful and corrupted, and a lot of times they're ones who are calling the shots. The bishop posted a video proclaiming that no UMC member church should be left out of the conversation. And that's exactly what happened to this church. At one time, this church was one of the biggest in the whole district. East Ohio lost 250 churches, about one third of their budget. They went from 10 districts to four, but laid off no district superintendents. Wow, think about that. And this again shows you more of the corruption of the UMC. Even though they lost over a third of their churches and their budget, lost 250 churches, they still had the same amount of executive clergy, the DSs, who are getting big salaries. Okay. So last month, the pastor just announced, okay, and this is why I want to bring this up because this was on the website I just found. So this pastor announced that she's leaving. She's not even going to be a pastor anymore, which that's kind of a blessing in disguise. But she's leaving to go to a nonprofit. So that's why you see this announcement on the church website. They were celebrating the pastor is leaving, I guess, January 10th. Okay. But the problem is that this pastor who's now running for the hills destroyed this entire church, two churches. She totally destroyed two churches and then runs for the hills. That's what they all do. They all and that's all this is what the UMC has been doing for the past couple of years. They're just destroying, splitting apart church families. Okay. So there's many people upset, obviously, because there were some people, a small minority, who actually stayed with this pastor because they believed in what she was telling them, even though she was deceiving them the entire time. So there was this individual says they believe, from their observations of all this for years, that there are three groups that they saw. The first group saw the corruption and deception and would not stand for it and left. That comes at a cost, obviously, and that's what a lot of conservatives did in the UMC. A lot of them saw this all coming and they left. And a lot of people criticized them for that, but this is the mess that you end up with. The second group saw what was happening, but did not want to pay the cost for their own reasons. They might be losing status on the board or confronting the pastor. I honestly believe the second group is the overwhelming majority of Methodist members today. There are a lot of people in the UMC who have been in the UMC maybe their whole life. Maybe they grew up in the Methodist church, but a lot of them know and see this corruption happening. A lot of them know that a lot of these doctrines and stances the UMC is taking is unbiblical, but yet they still remain in the UMC because like this individual said, there is a cost. But what did Jesus say? Jesus said, count the costs, right? Jesus said, if you want to be my disciple, deny yourself, carry your cross, and follow me. There is a cost for being a true disciple of Christ, okay? And many people don't want to pay that price. Many people, because basically what's going to happen is you're going to have to start over, okay? And that scares a lot of people because a lot of people are more into the religion and all, and the positions and the notoriety than they are serving Christ. A lot of pastors, I actually do get emails from Methodist pastors, active ones, who know all this is wrong, but they still remain in the UMC because they don't want to lose their position as a pastor. They don't want to lose their credentials. Is that honoring God? So that's the second group. Let me find. The third group are ones who were in the dark. They refused to get in the church politics and were still willing to take their money. And shame on those people also. There's people who just want to show up on a Sunday and that's it, and then just go home. They don't want to serve the church. They don't want to be involved in the church. And shame on you because you are the church. All right. Every single person should be involved in the church, should be actively involved in some aspect because you are the church, right? There is no, church is not entertainment or, those people do that and I do this. Okay. You are the body of Christ if you are a Christian and you should be involved. So, looking at this, I'm just reading through. So that's basically what I have for that. So that is the story of this church. So this pastor here, she destroyed both churches by lying and deceiving the people, and then she left and ran for the hills. And so this is another sad story of a big Methodist church, and this is what the corruption and deception has happened. And I'm bringing this to light because this could be happening. This could be happening right now in your church, and you don't even know it. How much do you know what's going on behind the scenes? How far away? Think about the size of this church at one time. This was a huge, pretty big church, and it was destroyed literally in one night. at that meeting. Don't think that your church is not vulnerable to total collapse because, right, as the Apostle Paul says, a little leaven leavens the whole batch, right? You compromise a little bit, you let a little sin in, and this is what happens. It corrupts the entire batch. So that's what I have for today. If you have a story that you would like me to share, let me know. If you would like to come on and tell it yourself, let me know. And keep praying for these people, for the dispersed brothers and sisters, and pray that they get out of this corrupt, wicked denomination. Until next time, God bless you all.